1914. In the early morning of May 29th, the Canadian Pacific Railway steamer, the RMS Empress of Ireland, was involved in a collision with the Norwegian collier ship, the SS Storstad. Despite being equipped with watertight compartments and enough lifeboats for passengers all aboard 2 years after the sinking of the RMS Titanic, the ship rolled over and foundered within 14 minutes. 1,012 lives were lost either being trapped inside the ship or in the freezing St. Lawrence River, making it one of the worst peacetime maritime disasters in Canadian history. But unfortunately, her sinking would be overshadowed by the initial start of the First World War in a few months, and it was widely forgotten. While there's a few videos about the Empress of Ireland here and there, especially the wonderful documentary made by Mike Brady from Ocean Liner Designs from last year, a big shout out to him. Today, we discuss the sinking of the SS Empress of Ireland. The Empress of Ireland is the second of the pair of ocean liners that is ordered by the Canadian Pacific Railway during the early years of the operation on the North Atlantic. In 1903, Canadian Pacific entered the market for the transatlantic passenger service between travel from the United Kingdom to Canada and vice versa as well. In February of that year, they purchased the Elder Dempster and Company, to which they obtained 3 ships from the subsidiary, which is actually an extension of the original company, of the Beaver Line. So these ships were actually the Lake Champlain, Lake Erie, not the lake itself, and Lake Manitoba. The following April, the line proved to be a success for the North Atlantic trade route. The Empress of Ireland and her sister ship, the Empress of Britain, was built in a shipyard at Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering in Glasgow, Scotland, and designed by Francis Elgar. The design for both ships was specified to be twin-screw liners with service speeds up to 18 knots, and since both were of identical appearances, with 2 funnels and 2 masts with equal passenger capacities of over 1,500. The keel of the Empress of Ireland was laid down on April 10th of 1905, and her hull number was 443 at Fairview's berth number 4 next to the Empress of Britain, which is her sister ship. The length of the Empress of Ireland is 570 feet long and 548 between perpendiculars. The beam for this ship was actually 65.7 feet, and her depth was actually 36.7. The Empress of Ireland also has twin 4-bladed propellers, and each of them were actually driven by a quadruple expansion steam engine. So between them, the engines were actually rated at 3,168 nautical horsepower, and this actually gave the Empress of Ireland her service speed of 18 knots. So for appearance, she also had twin funnels and 2 masts. The ship also has 7 decks, berths for 1,542 passengers in 4 different classes, to which we will go over that a little bit later on. A key safety feature on board the Empress of Ireland is her 10 watertight compartments, which divides up the ship to 11. Then it could be sealed off through the means of closing 24 watertight doors, all 11 bulkheads extended from the double bottom up to directly beneath the shelter deck. By design theory of the Empress of Ireland, the ship could remain afloat with up to 2 compartments, as long as they are adjacent to each other, open to the sea. The problem with the watertight compartments on the Empress of Ireland is that they have to be closed manually. Unlike another ship, the Titanic, the ship can be closed by the means of a switch on the ship of the bridge. The Empress of Ireland was actually launched on January 27th of 1906, and 6 months later, she would be fitted out with her engines, boilers, funnels, furniture, and everything the ship needs to be a Canadian Pacific ocean liner. So, now since we're actually on about the fitting out process, let's actually take a look at her accommodations as well. For first class, located amidships on the upper and lower promenade shelter decks could accommodate up to 310 passengers. These accommodations include access to the open boat deck and the 2 enclosed promenade decks that wrap the full exterior of the ship. The upper promenade has a music room with built-in sofas, a grand piano encircling the glass dome over the first-class dining room, and also on the boat deck is the top landing of the first-class main staircase, which is similarly seen aboard the RMS Titanic, facing aft and extend down 2 decks to the entrance of the first-class dining room. The lower promenade deck has a library, which is situated at the forward end of the deck, with windows overlooking the ship's bow. Located amidships was a cafe, which was pierced by the 2-story well above the first-class dining room, and the aft end would be the first-class smoke room. 1 deck below on the shelter deck was the first-class dining room, which could seat up to 224 passengers, and there's also a separate dining room for up to 30 first-class children located at the forward end of the deck. Scattered across the ships on all 3 decks were arrays of 2 and 4 berth cabins. Second class accommodations are located in the stern on the lower promenade, shelter, upper, and main decks. They can accommodate up to 150 more passengers than in first class, with a capacity of 469 in second class when fully booked. They were allotted open deck space in the aft end of the lower promenade deck, extending from the end of the superstructure beneath the docking bridge and at the end of the stern, while one deck below on the shelter deck was located additional deck space sheltered by the deck above. Located in the aft end of the deck is the second class smoke room, located on the shelter deck, which is designed in a similar but simple fashion as seen in first class. At the forward end of the deck beneath the aft mast was a second class entrance with a staircase running down two decks to the main deck. After the main landing is a social hall, a similar fashion to the smoke room that provides a piano, large to seat 256 passengers and one serving. There are cabins for 134 passengers on the upper deck that is actually designed to be converted into first class if needed, while the cabins for 234 passengers on the main deck could be converted to be used for third class if needed. Immigrants and lower class travelers, the Empress of Ireland is designed with accommodations which symbolize the dramatic shift in the travel of the North Atlantic, which is commonly seen between the turn of the 20th century and the outbreak of the First World War. Passengers that actually travel in these two classes had shared public areas. This includes access to the forward well deck on the shelter deck, as well as a large open space on the upper deck, just like the Titanic. The open space actually spanned the full width of the ship and the length of two watertight compartments that include benches lining the outer walls, and, I kid you not on this one, there's actually a large children's sandbox enclosed by a bulkhead. Port side had the third-class ladies' room, which includes a piano, whilst across starboard is the third-class smoke room, complete with a full bar. Just 2 months after the Empress of Britain entered service, the Empress of Ireland departed from Liverpool for Quebec City on her maiden voyage on Thursday, June 29, 1906. She made port at Moville to pick up a number of Irish immigrants before making for the Atlantic. She carried 1,257 for her first crossing, as third class was overbooked that at least 100 passengers were booked passage were actually left behind, basically waiting for another ship. As she traveled across the Atlantic, she entered the St. Lawrence River in Canada on the afternoon of July 6th, as the Empress of Ireland actually called for a river pilot. For those that don't know what a river pilot is a mariner who has specific knowledge of any dangerous or congested waterways, such as harbors or river mouths. So this pilot would actually assist in guiding the ship down the final 300-kilometer stretch to Quebec City. While off the coast of Rimouski, another smaller boat met with the Empress of Ireland to collect all Canadian-bound mail and drop off a group of people working to aid in preparing for the liner's arrival. These would be ticket agents who would meet up with all of the passengers who arrange transportation by rail to their final destinations. Canadian immigration and customs officials inspected luggage and checked documents. Doctors to examine all passengers to check for illness that would warrant a quarantine at Grosse Isle. All but one actually passed successfully. And the reason for this is passengers can actually go from Liverpool to Japan without ever having to leave the ship or the train whatsoever. So, of course, over the 8 years, the Empress of Ireland completed the process of transporting passengers and cargo between Britain and Canada and altering Canada ports by season, terminating Quebec City in May through October, and at Halifax, Nova Scotia, and St. John in New Brunswick in November through April. However, the world changed forever on the day of April 15, 1912, as the RMS Titanic, White Star Line's newest vessel, was lost to the sea after a collision with an iceberg, and 1,496 lives were lost. Since I actually won't go into further detail about the Titanic, I have already done a documentary about the ship itself, to which it can actually be viewed at the top corner of your screen. In the wake of the Titanic disaster, the Empress of Ireland had her life-saving equipment updated. In 1906, she had standard wooden boats, and 6 years later, in 1912, she had steel lifeboats actually mounted into conventional radial davits, under which were stored another 26 wooden collapsible lifeboats. All combined had a capacity of 1,686 people. Another feature that the Empress of Ireland didn't have was a wireless telegraphy. Now, it is common for ships before the loss of the Titanic to not have a wireless set on board, and in the aftermath of the disaster just 1 year later, in 1913, the Empress of Ireland, who previously did not operate with one during her crossings, is now equipped with this latest new technology, operating at 300 and 600 meter wavelengths. Her final crossing ended when she arrived at Quebec City from Liverpool on May 22nd, 1914. At this point, she had done 95 trips, transported 119,262 passengers to Canada, and 667,838 to Britain. It's May 28th, 1914, just under 3 months before the outbreak of the First World War, and you can actually really feel the tension across Europe as political tensions divided Europe from within. Basically, countries are smack talking one another, and the cherry on top was the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But hey, that's another story for another time. There are going to be some notable characters that we'll actually go over, and these are basically the notable passengers and crew on the final crossing of the Empress of Ireland. But there's actually going to be more eventually as time goes on. The first man you see in this photo is Captain Henry Kendall, who had been just promoted to captain of the Empress of Ireland in early May, and this was his first time going down the St. Lawrence River in command of her. He's known for the infamous capture of a suspicious passenger on board the Montrose, who was wanted for murder, and the man was Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen, who killed his wife and fled with his accomplice lover. But hey, that's another story for another time. Another one is Lawrence Irving, who since 1912 had been on stage tour in Australia and North America, and together with his wife and partner, Mabel Hackney. He has wowed audiences on stage and turned his hand to writing hit plays. He met his wife in 1901 and were later married in 1903 and would actually co-star together. Another gentleman is a sportsman by the name of Sir Henry Seton Carr, a sportsman and former member of the British House of Commons who's actually returned home from a hunting trip to British Columbia. Another man is Henry Lyman, head of the firm Lyman Sons and Company, which is the largest pharmaceutical company in Canada. Another gentleman is associate editor for the Financial Times is Wallace Palmer, and his wife Ethel, who also traveled on board with him. Now, there's not really a whole lot of crew, but there's actually one that I do want to mention on here is William Clark. He is a fireman on board the Empress of Ireland, and he has previously survived the sinking of the Titanic 2 years prior by boarding lifeboat number 15. And if you see this man, steer clear of him if he's on board your ship. Now, the ship itself was actually right on the money for booking, to which 2/3 of the ship has been booked for her capacity, but however, first class happened to have the smallest list of passengers by 87, to which is kind of surprising, but is actually very unusual at the same time. Second class saw a large booking at over capacity with 253, and this was due to a large party of the Salvation Army members and their families, numbering at 167, who were actually traveling to attend the 3rd International Salvation Army Congress in London. They were headed by this man, David Rees, a kind man at the age of 57 years old, and joining him is his wife, Ruth Rees. 500 Canadian delegates were planning on making the trip across the ocean, while others booked on the other ships within the coming days. There will be a huge reception at the historic Royal Albert Hall, and the turnout is expected to be 5,000 people. So third class actually did saw the largest booking, which is 717 passengers, and it's actually nearly filled, reflecting greatly a typical mix of steerage travelers seen on the eastbound crossings aboard the Empress and her running mates in the North Atlantic. Westbound trips will actually be predominantly by a diverse mix of immigrants, and eastbound crossings saw diverse blends of former immigrants from both Canada and the United States returning to their native countries in Europe. At 4:30 p.m., it was time for the ship to depart, and the lines connected the ship to the shore cast off, and tugs came to her assistance. As the ship slowly pulled away from the quay, the Salvation Army band unexpectedly started playing music with their instruments and played a final song, a farewell to their friends and family. This song was called God Be With You Till We Meet Again. So, in the late afternoon, the Empress cleared the channel and Captain Kendall opened her engines as the ship slowly left Quebec, and for many, this was actually be their last time seeing home. And then the crowd actually began to disperse as the ship settled into their new home and explored the ship, being accustomed to their cabins and as the ship sails up through the St. Lawrence River. As the sun actually did set, passengers began retiring in for dinner, so they spent a couple of hours exploring the ship and being accustomed to their new home. And there's actually a fine line tradition for first-class passengers that they don't have to change into their fine clothes for dinner since everyone's actually too tired. But the only exception was actually Seton Carr, who actually did ignore that tradition, but he still dressed up in his best anyway. So after dinner, passengers began to utilize the ship's accommodations, such as the music room, which is actually centered up on top of the dining room's dome. And so they converge into the library where the smoke rooms. While the Empress is actually not as big as the transatlantic liners, she actually still has that style of a luxury ocean liner. The Empress of Ireland approached Rimouski, where it would drop off his pilot, a man by the name of Adelard Lawyer. His job was to navigate the Empress of Ireland out of the St. Lawrence River as far as Father Point past Rimouski. He's a local and actually knew the waters real well. The bridge is kept dark to conserve night vision, but there's actually one danger that actually threatens the vision, and that would be fog. For those that don't know what fog is a visible aerosol that consists of water droplets or ice crystals suspended in the air or at near the Earth's surface. It could be considered low-lying cloud and is heavily influenced by nearby bodies of water, topography, and wind conditions. Fog can also affect human activities, and the Empress would be affected by this fog. The St. Lawrence River is known for generating impenetrable banks of fog, seemingly at random. So, whenever a ship actually does approach that fog, they're actually required to close at least one watertight compartment door. Previously mentioned in one part is that the watertight doors for the Empress of Ireland, it's not like the Titanic's, to which you could be able to throw a switch and they close automatically. They're actually hand cranked. Stewards are actually trained to crank these doors down, and basically disaster would be the last thing for them. At 1:30 a.m., the Empress of Ireland reached Father Point, thus Lawyer departed on a smaller cutter named the Eureka. Along with Lawyer, a sack of mail was actually tossed, last in the mail to leave the ship. The letters are from the Salvationists, writing to their loved ones and friends about the fun they had on board. As the Eureka set out for home and the Empress of Ireland started up her engines, little did the crew or the Lawyer knew that it would be the last time they would see the Empress of Ireland afloat. So as stewards actually prepared for the following morning for breakfast on board the ship, passengers were actually asleep in their own beds. The only soul that's actually on board and awake is Captain Henry Kendall, Lookout John Carroll, and a few quartermasters. John Carroll actually did spot a single ship up far from the St. Lawrence River and actually rang that bell. A single bell actually would mean that there's an object to the right. So he actually did notice a pair of bridge lights that's actually up in the distance, basically the bridge wing lights. You got green for starboard and red for port. And as this ship was actually steaming through, a thick blanket of fog would actually encloak both ships. So the Empress of Ireland had to slow down and basically had to slow to a stop. So the biggest rules for the fog that goes as following is you had to post extra lookouts, sound the ship's whistles at regular intervals, and also grope slowly without ever changing course. And the good thing about the Empress of Ireland is that she can actually do stop safely, but you can't control the ship's movements once it stops in the St. Lawrence River. The St. Lawrence River actually does happen to have strong currents that can actually still take the ship wherever the current can take either one of them. Kendall actually second-guessed himself and rang the telegraph full astern to bring the ship to a stop until the fog passes, and actually blasted 3 short whistles saying, "I am going full astern." As the fog hit the Empress of Ireland and Captain Kendall ordered the ship to stop, he blasted the whistles twice, "I am stopped." Then suddenly, out of the fog, lights appeared and they were actually coming closer, and it was on a crash course collision to the Empress of Ireland.